Hi there, and welcome to another episode of How the Game Was Won. Today we're looking at the game between Jakovenko as white and Caruana as black. It was played in the 11th and final round of the FIDE Grand Prix in Tashkent, and the date the game was played was the 2nd of November 2014. The opening follows a perk defense but without any drastic theoretical deals. So without further ado, let's run through the opening couple of moves so that we can get to the first of the various interesting positions to look at. White opened with knight f3 followed by g6, e4, d6, which is all fairly standard perk defense. So white continued with c4, bishop q4, d4, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, e5 and d5. Ultimately, this type of position does not seem to be really that bad for black. By forcing white to play d5 and exchange his knight for the bishop, black has achieved good chances to control the many dark squares on the board. However, at the same time, it must be said that through all of this, white has now got the advantage of the two bishops, even though it's still a long way from the pieces being fully developed. Here black continues with knight d7, knight c3, h5, bishop d3, knight g to f6, and here white castle short, and Caruana uncorks the novelty of the game by playing h4. Pushing the forward like this is in order to be able to establish some sort of a weakness on into his opponent's kingside pawn structure. White continues with bishop c2, bishop e7, and for instance, instead of bishop e7, black could have played bishop h6, simply trading off the bishops, which looks to be a fairly logical type of move to do, especially seeing that would then counter the situation of white having the twin bishops. But black played bishop e7 e6 instead, allowing white to come bishop a4, king f8, and here white should have played something along the lines of bishop e3, and then only has to play, for instance, b4 and then answer a5 with an a3 push, which would then at least give white's overall structure very much of a solid feel. But instead, black played b4 straight away, and now means that black can now push a5, forcing white effectively to take the a pawn. Because if white had played, for instance, a3 instead, then black playing knight b6 gives a really awkward position for white to be able to defend. Because firstly, the bishop will be then effectively stuck on the a4 square as well, because it's the bishop that that's effectively preventing black's potential pin running all the way down the A file. So here white plays bishop A5, or B takes A5 should I say. White answers rook takes A5, bishop D7, queen takes D7, A4, king G7. So what we can be looking at here is from a structural point of view compared to what a normal, for instance, king's Indian defense would have been, that black should be fairly happy with his position. There are no real holes, no real obvious targets for white to be able to attack. Yes, sure, the F7 pawn could be a potential target, but in order to be able to get something rolling towards the F pawn would involve moving the queen forward, and black is already covering the F4, F5 squares, so there's no way for the black to be able to move his queen forward to be able to get a rook in behind the queen by way of a rook lift to exert pressure onto that F7 square. So all in all, black's position is looking remarkably sound. So here white continued with rook B1, B6, rook B5, rook A6, bishop D2, knight F7, queen E2, bishop G5. And again, one wonders why Caruana with black didn't just exchange the bishops before, but anyway. Now, white does the exchanging of the bishops, so black answers with knight takes G5. White pushes H3, because with black's bishops off the board, there's nothing to be able to close down the H2 square, so black or white can allow himself a little bit of lift to be able to guard against a backrank swindle down the line. Black continues with queen E7, rook B to B back to B1, rook A5, queen E3, and white plays the knight back to H7. Now, very importantly, that as far as a knight maneuver is concerned, if black can get his knight up to F4, that will be a stunning outpost to be able to plant the knight on, as far as being able to control key attacking squares into the white camp. And to be able to get the knight there, it would probably have to first travel via, for instance, F6 and an H5. So it's quite a maneuver to be able to get the knight all the way up to the f4 square, but obviously that's the ideal square for the knight to be getting to. So let's see if Caruana is able to get his knight all the way through to there, or if Jakovenko will be able to prevent that. But as it is, Jakovenko is rapidly running out of ideas. So what does he do? He presses f4 as a lash out to the center before it's too late. But black is well prepared for this, so all that is left is black obviously pushes the knight up to f6, making it a mere 2 squares away from getting to its f5 outpost, so f4 outpost. And white continues by taking, so it's f takes e5, d takes e5, which effectively gives black a potentially troublesome backward pawn at c7, but then again white has now got a very solidly weak e4 pawn, which is going to be a brilliant target for black to be able to attack. In this situation, instead of playing d takes e5, another possibility would have been for black to be able to take with the queen. White plays rook f3, but then again this might have been a little bit risky, because all that white would now be able to do is, for instance, swing the rook across to f1, and he'd have the doubled up rooks piling down onto that f7 square that I was mentioning earlier. So instead, black took with the b pawn, allowing white to play rook b5. Black doubles up the rooks on the a file, and here Jakovenko makes his major mistake. He should have, in this position, he should have played something along the lines of, say, queen f3 with rook takes b5, c takes b5, and black is still far from breaching into white's position, although it's still much more comfortable for black than what it is for white. But instead, white plays queen g5, and that just simply gives away the pawn. Black takes knight takes b5, and although this tactic isn't that much really difficult to spot, maybe it simply slipped Jakovenko's mind. Maybe there's a certain amount of time pressure involved as well, because the combination just continues with queen takes e7, knight takes e7, rook b1, rook takes b5, c takes b5, king f8, king f2, king e8, king e3, f5, and now in this situation it must have been time pressure, because in this situation, for instance, white had rook b2 at his disposal, which would have been allowed a continuation of, for instance, rook d8, rook takes, king takes, knight b1, knight c8, knight d2, king e7, knight f3, king f6, knight takes h4, knight d6, which is still looking really positive for black, but it's still at least playable for white. Whereas instead of doing all of that, white simply plays knight d5, and that just makes black's whole game immensely easier, because all that black now does is pick up the wayward a pawn. Yes, sure, White can take the c7 pawn with check. If the king goes up to f7, White can take e takes f5. Black answers with the knight. The king goes to f3, e4 with check, covered obviously by the rook. The king goes up to f4, push the pawn to e3 check. The pawn's still covered by the knight, so the king has to go back to f3. The rook goes down to a2 to cover the e2 square for a pawn push, and White is clearly completely lost already in this situation. The pawn sitting on e3 is obviously immensely powerful, and what's more, there's this immensely strong move of rook f2 that is being threatened at the moment, which is going to be catastrophic for White's position, because after pushing the coming across to f2 with check, there's obviously the pawn on g2 that's going to be falling, and after that the h pawn will fall shortly thereafter, and that will leave Black with 3 pawns marauding their way down the king's side all the way to queening squares. So in an attempt to cover that f2 square, White has to play rook to f1. That means that Black can bring his rook across to d2. The white knight goes to a8, trying to hit at that b6 pawn, but really the threats, Black's threats to the king's side, are way more important than the threat that White has to that b6 pawn. He simply doesn't have enough tempi in hand to be able to take the pawn, get the knight out of the way, and push the pawn through. There just simply aren't enough moves left in the game to be able to cover that with all of the way serious threats that Black has going. So Black comes back to d6, covering the b6 pawn, which means that there's nothing really that White can do with a knight that's stuck all the way off in the corner, and Black will easily be able to, for instance, if he wanted to, swing a rook in, or for that matter at a later stage even after pushing to e2, the knight would then be able to come all the way back to e1, which will be basically having the entire game all over by the shouting. So what did White have in this situation? Bring the rook across to a1. Really, it doesn't do anything, because all Black needs to do now is slam the knight down onto d4. The king has to move to e4, and the pawn goes to e2. There's really nothing much that White can do about this at the moment. Yes, he brought the knight in, the rook into e1 to cover the queening square, but really all that Black does now is pick up the pawn, and as I mentioned, it's completely all over, because after picking up the pawn, getting the knight out of the way, in this situation Jakovenko resigned, and Caruana picked up the full point to move him a bit further up the tournament finishing table and gain a couple more points in the Grand Prix series to work his way closer to getting into the next candidates tournament. So that is how the game was won. Please post your comments and questions down below, and don't forget to click the thumbs up like button down there as well, and also click that big red subscribe button down there as well. That way you can stay up to date on new games as I post them on a week-to-week basis. And remember that this channel will be covering all the games in the Anand vs Carlsen World Championship match that starts on Saturday, November the 8th. Stay carved up for the win. Stay safe out there. See you next time. Cheers.